Dawn in the highlands of British-controlled Burma did not break gently. It tore through the horizon like a blade carving light into the thinning mist that hovered above the wire fences of Camp D-17. Every morning the sun arrived before the guards were fully awake, before the prisoners had finished whispering whatever fragile dreams they still dared to share. And on that particular morning in August 1945, 2 weeks after the Emperor's surrender, though few at the camp even knew it, a brittle quiet covered everything waiting to crack. Corporal Thomas Ainsley, 26, Birmingham-born and already looking 10 years older than his age, made his walk along the eastern perimeter with the sluggish discipline of a man who had seen too much but still showed up. His boots bit into the red dirt the way the war had bitten into him, permanent, unavoidable, strangely familiar after so long. He had taken 2 steps past the wire intersection when he saw her. At first it looked like a bundle of tattered cloth folded at the base of the fence, but the shape was too purposeful, too human. The early light turned the contours of the form into something unmistakable. A woman, thin, slight knees drawn inward as if trying to protect herself from the earth itself. A Japanese POW. A woman among the prisoners was rare. One broken and alone at dawn was rarer still. Thomas felt his stomach seize. Instinct told him to raise his rifle, though he quickly forced the barrel downward. The war was ending. He had been telling himself that every day. But the reflex lived deeper than thought. He moved toward her carefully, his boots crunching on pebbled dirt. As he drew closer, the details formed details he would remember for the rest of his life. Her hair, black and cropped unevenly, clung to her face with sweat and grime. Her cheekbone, bruised in shades of sickly yellow and deep plum, seemed to pulse faintly as she tried to breathe. The bones of her shoulders cut sharply against her torn uniform, and a thin rope of dried blood streaked down her left forearm. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She was barely conscious. Thomas knelt beside her, swallowing the metallic sting in his throat. He had seen prisoners in poor condition before, but something was different about this woman. Something fragile, something refusing to break even though everything in her appearance said she already had. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked, voice softer than he intended. Her eyelids fluttered open, just a sliver. Dark pupils glinted, not with defiance, but with confusion. Animal confusion, the kind that comes when pain is too vast to understand. She tried to speak, but the air scraped her throat like gravel. Thomas looked over his shoulder. The nearest guard tower was empty for the shift change. The camp was still half asleep. No one else had seen her collapse. He leaned closer. "What happened to you?" For a moment, she seemed not to know whether he was real. Then with a trembling effort she lifted one hand, the motion slow like pushing through water, and pointed at her ribs. Broken, bruised, struck. He didn't know, but he could read suffering. Everyone in Burma could. Thomas hesitated only a breath. Regulation said he should call a superior. Experience told him she'd be left in the dirt until someone decided she was worth the trouble. And conscience, the part of him he kept buried under fatigue and guilt, told him something else entirely. He slipped his arms beneath her. The moment he lifted her, her body spasmed, a sound escaping her chest that was not quite a cry, not quite a breath, a raw, strangled thing that made Thomas tense, as if he'd been hit. "It's all right," he murmured, even though he knew she couldn't understand English. "You're safe now. Or you will be." She was lighter than he expected, shockingly light, as if her bones were hollow reeds. Her head fell against his shoulder. Her skin was hot, feverish. Too hot. Dehydration. Infection. Exhaustion. Maybe all of them. He stood up, adjusting her weight so he wouldn't jostle her broken places. She didn't resist. She was long past resistance. As he carried her toward the infirmary hut, the sky finally cleared of mist. Sunlight spilled across her face, revealing fresh details, the split at the corner of her mouth, the half-healed lash marks at her collarbone, the faint pattern of rope burn around each wrist. Who had done this? Japanese officers, British Guards, circumstance. The war itself, he didn't know, but someone had treated her like she wasn't human. She stirred weakly, and he felt her breath shallow, desperate against his collar. "My name's Thomas," he whispered, unsure why he felt compelled to introduce himself to someone slipping in and out of the world. "You hold on all right. We're nearly there." She did not reply, but she tried to. Her throat moved a faint ghost of speech. Thomas leaned closer, but the sound dissolved into nothing. Behind him, the rest of Camp D-17 began to wake distant shouts, boots hitting the ground, the clatter of metal against metal. Soon officers would notice he was carrying a Japanese woman like a wounded comrade. Soon questions would come, but Thomas kept walking. He reached the infirmary just as Sergeant Colby, a man whose dislike of Japanese prisoners was no secret, stepped out with a clipboard. Colby's eyes widened. What the hell is this? Thomas shifted his grip protectively. Found her collapsed on perimeter east. She needs treatment. Colby snorted. She's the enemy. The enemy surrendered. Still the enemy. Thomas felt heat rise in his chest. She's a human being. Colby opened his mouth ready to argue, but something in Thomas's face, something unyielding, something newly awakened, stopped him. Fine, Colby said grudgingly. Put her on the cot. But don't expect priority care, and she better not die on my watch. Thomas stepped past him. He laid the woman onto the infirmary cot with the gentleness of someone handling fragile glass. Her fingers twitched as they left his arms, as if reaching back for the warmth, or maybe for stability, or maybe just instinctively fearing abandonment. He stood there frozen for a moment. A prisoner, a stranger, an enemy, and yet somehow someone he suddenly felt responsible for. "Do you know her name?" the camp medic asked as he approached. "No," Thomas said quietly. "But I'm going to find out." The medic nodded and began evaluating her wounds. Fever, severe fatigue, probable malnutrition, likely internal bruising. Her survival wasn't guaranteed. Thomas stepped back, watching every small movement as if his attention alone might guard her. He didn't understand why he cared so deeply. But he knew the moment he lifted her, something shifted inside him, something warmer than duty, heavier than guilt. A dawn had broken inside him and around him, and neither looked like the dawns before. And in that brightness he made a silent vow he would not let her die. Not in this place, not after what she'd survived, not while he still breathed. The infirmary smelled of carbolic acid and old rain, two scents that never mixed cleanly, no matter how many times the medics tried to scrub the floors. By midday, the heat inside the hut grew thick enough to tremble above the lantern wicks. Corporal Thomas Ainsley stood just inside the doorway, sweating through his uniform, but he refused to leave. The Japanese woman lay on the canvas cot to his right. She had not regained full consciousness, though now and then she drifted near the surface of waking, her brows tightening as if some distant memory clawed at her. The medic, Private Edwards, moved between bandages and a small stack of medical supplies. "She's stable for now," he said, "but she's dehydrated to hell. Fever's climbing, too." "How bad?" Thomas asked. Edwards didn't sugarcoat. "If she'd stayed out there another hour, she'd be dead." Thomas's hands tightened around the strap of his rifle. He wasn't meant to be holding it inside the infirmary, but no one had told him to leave. Perhaps they saw his stance or the look in his eyes and decided he was another fixture of the hut. He stepped closer to her. "Can she understand English?" Edwards shrugged. "Maybe basic words. She might have picked up some. But in her condition, hard to say." "Does she have a name?" "Found this?" Edwards held up a small wooden tag, its edges charred. "Half burned," was in her uniform pocket. Thomas took it carefully. The writing, once carved neatly, had been partially scorched, leaving behind 3 characters he struggled to decipher. But he recognized the last one he had seen, enough surrender documents to know it was a common Japanese family marker. Edwards peered over his shoulder. "Any idea?" Thomas shook his head. "I'll ask her when she wakes." "If she wakes," he added silently. The afternoon dragged. Prisoners outside formed into working groups. Officers barked orders. A few guards whispered that the Japanese might soon be released now that rumors of surrender had reached even these isolated hills. Others scoffed, claiming they'd believe the war was over only when supply trucks stopped arriving with bodies. Inside the hut, time felt suspended, like a separate world. Thomas finally pulled up a wooden stool beside her. She was breathing better now, though every inhale seemed to test the edges of pain beneath her ribs. He should have been back at his post, but he'd already turned in a vague report saying he was assisting the medic. Colby would complain later. Thomas didn't care. Near sunset, as the sky bruised purple, she stirred again. Her eyelids quivered. Her fingers twitched. Thomas leaned forward. "Can you hear me?" he asked. This time she responded barely. Her lips parted, the shape of words ghosting across them. He listened closely. "Me." The sound was faint, fragile, and yet real enough to catch. Her eyes opened a sliver, and he saw them, dark, depth-filled, trembling with exhaustion, yet alert enough to meet his gaze for a heartbeat before drifting again. "Your name," he murmured, repeating the syllable. "Me," she tried again, and this time the breath carried a touch more strength. "Miyako." Her voice cracked mid-syllable, as if the weight of speaking was too much. But the word hovered in the air long after she drifted back into silence. Miyako. A name that felt too delicate for the violence she had endured. Thomas repeated it under his breath once-twice until the shape of it settled into him like a vow. "Miyako," he said softly. "All right, thank you. You rest." Edward, sorting vials near the far wall, raised his brows. "She told you?" "Yes." "Good. She'll need someone who knows her name. Folks heal faster when someone calls them back into living." Thomas wasn't sure if that was real medicine or Edwards's brand of superstition, but he didn't argue. Night fell. A storm gathered over the far ridges, low thunder rumbling across the valleys. Rain began tapping the roof in uneven beats. Thomas stayed by Miyako's side through it all. At about 1 in the morning, another guard, Private Langford, stumbled in for a bandage after cutting himself on a food crate. He eyed the cot. "Is that the one Ainsley found?" Edwards nodded. "Fever's rough, but she's hanging on." Langford scowled. "Should have left her where she dropped. They didn't show mercy to any of ours." Thomas turned slowly. "Go on," he said flatly. "Finish that sentence." Langford hesitated. He had at least enough sense not to push further. Just saying, "War changes how mercy works." Thomas rose to his feet. "Exactly. But the war is ending. So mercy changes again." Langford rolled his eyes. "You spend too much time thinking. We should all try it sometime." Langford grumbled and left. Thomas returned to his stool. His pulse still hammered from the exchange. When dawn came with quieter colors than the morning before, Miyako's fever finally broke. Sweat drenched her hairline, but her breathing steadied. Her skin no longer radiated heat like burning metal. She opened her eyes fully for the first time. Slowly, carefully, as if each blink tested whether the world was safe to return to. Thomas froze, afraid to startle her. Her gaze searched the room, timid, confused, then landed on him. For the next 3 seconds the world went still. Her expression was not fear exactly, but the fear of fear. Wariness layered over exhaustion, trying to decide whether the man before her was danger or salvation. Thomas raised both hands slightly, palms outward, letting her see he meant no harm. "Hello?" he said softly. "You're safe. I promise." She stared at him, eyes wide, dark, shimmering with the exhaustion of someone who hadn't seen kindness in a long time. He tapped his chest. "Thomas," then pointed gently at her. "Miyako." She blinked once, then slowly nodded. Good, he thought. That's a start. Edward stepped in, checking Miyako's pulse. She tensed immediately. Thomas noticed and leaned closer so she could see his face, a stable point in a world that had shifted too many times. "It's all right," he murmured. "He's helping." Miyako's shoulders eased. Barely, but enough. When Edward stepped away, she shifted her head toward Thomas, her voice a rough whisper. "Why?" "Help." The question hit him harder than he expected. "Because you needed it," he said. Her brows drew together faintly, as if the logic did not fully add up. As if she had long ago accepted a different version of the world, one where need did not guarantee compassion. She tried again. "British." "Soldier." Japanese." "I know," he said quietly. "The war made us enemies. But the war is ending. You're a person. That's what matters." She looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly, carefully, she nodded, not in full trust, but in the fragile acknowledgement of possibility. When she spoke again, her voice trembled like a leaf in wind. "Thank you." The words were thin, barely audible, but they were the first step of a bridge neither of them had expected to cross. Thomas swallowed the sudden burn in his chest. "You're welcome, Miyako." For the first time, her gaze softened. Edwards returned with water. "Try to get her to drink." Thomas lifted the cup, but Miyako recoiled slightly, not fearfully but instinctively, as if expecting punishment for needing too much. He softened his voice. "May I—" She hesitated, then nodded. Thomas guided the cup to her lips. She drank slowly, each swallow painful but necessary, her thin frame shaking with effort. Halfway through, she stopped to catch her breath, and Thomas waited steady as stone. When she finished, she lay back with a shudder of relief. For the first time since he'd found her at dawn, some measure of peace touched her features, small, uncertain, but real. Thomas felt something shift again inside him, something quiet, something deep. Not pity, not duty, something else. Miyako opened her eyes once more. "Thomas." "Stayed." "Yes," he said simply. "Why?" He searched for an answer, but the truth felt too raw for words, so he gave her the only one that fit. "You fell at dawn," he said, "and I couldn't walk away." Her gaze trembled, and for the briefest moment he saw the shadow of a life she'd had before the war, a life with laughter, with people who said her name gently, with mornings that did not hurt. A single tear escaped the corner of her eye. She didn't seem to notice it. Thomas did. He reached out, not touching her, just placing his hand near enough so she knew she wasn't alone. And for the first time, Miyako closed her eyes, not from pain, but from trust. A small spark. A beginning. A name reclaimed from the ashes. For the next 2 days, the camp changed around Miyako in small, cautious degrees. Word spread quickly that the Japanese woman Corporal Ainsley had carried in from the perimeter was no longer on the brink of death. Some prisoners whispered with suspicion, others with curiosity. A few guards made crude comments assuming Thomas had lost his discipline. Most chose indifference. Thomas ignored all of them. His world, once defined by orders, patrols, and relentless calculation of survival, narrowed to the confines of the infirmary hut, to Miyako's recovery, to her slow re-entry into consciousness like a timid animal coaxed from hiding. The first time she sat up on her own, Thomas was there. The first time she tried to stand, he caught her before her legs buckled. The first time she spoke more than 2 words, he listened as if nothing in the world mattered more. On the morning of the 3rd day, light spilled into the hut in soft, honey-colored ribbons. The rainstorm had passed, leaving the air crisp and newly washed. Miyako stirred awake, shifting slightly on the cot, the sound of canvas creaking beneath her. Thomas moved from his spot in the corner, setting aside a tin cup of boiled water. "Good morning," he said gently. Miyako blinked at him, then traced the window with her eyes still adjusting to brightness. "Morning," she whispered. Her voice was stronger, though still delicate. Thomas smiled, relieved. "Edward says your fever is gone. That's good news." She nodded, though her expression clouded. Her hand drifted toward her ribs where bruises hid beneath the bandages. "Pain?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not pain." Her voice faltered. "Memories." Thomas sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Do you want to tell me?" She looked down at her hands, thin, scarred wrists, ringed faintly with rope burns. She turned her palms upward as if trying to understand how they belonged to her. In halting English, she began, "I was taken, months ago, on the road north, our unit. Surrender too late." Thomas felt his chest tighten. "We were scared," she continued softly. "Not of dying, of not knowing, of what war makes of us." Her words faltered, and she inhaled shakily. "Men separated from women. I do not know where they go. We sent to different camps. Her throat closed off. "I try to be strong." Thomas angled his body closer. "You were strong." Miyako shook her head. "Strong people do not fall in dirt at dawn." He didn't hesitate. "Even strong people fall. What matters is that you're standing again." She looked at him, a long, searching look, and something fragile warmed in her expression. "Why you help me?" she asked again. But now the question carried deeper meaning, a quiet ache. "Many do not." Thomas exhaled slowly. He had no single answer, only a lifetime of small reasons that had accumulated like sediment in the corners of his heart. He cleared his throat. "Because I've seen suffering. enough to know when it has gone too far, and because the war took too much from all of us. It doesn't get to take our humanity, too." Miyako lowered her gaze, tears gathering. "Humanity," she whispered, tasting the word as if it were both foreign and familiar. "Hard to remember." Thomas reached forward carefully, placing his hand palm up on the cot. Not touching her offering. She hesitated. Then slowly her fingertips brushed the back of his hand, feather light. "Thank you," she whispered. The touch lasted barely a second, but the meaning lingered. Outside life in Camp D-17 resumed its uneasy rhythm. Prisoners marched to work details. Guards rotated shifts. Supplies arrived. Rumors circulated louder now of Japanese surrender and repatriation. Officers tried to maintain control, but everyone felt the war's end in the air. By midday, Miyako had regained enough strength to walk a short distance with support. Thomas stayed at her side as she crossed the hut one cautious step at a time. "Slow," he warned as she stumbled. She steadied herself, gripping his sleeve lightly. "I am slow." "That's fine," he replied. "You're healing." She reached the far wall, touched it for balance, and exhaled shakily. "Feels strange." "What does standing?" she said, softly. After thinking, "Maybe I never will again." Thomas swallowed. "You're here now. That's what matters." She turned to face him. The afternoon light silhouetted her thin figure, highlighting the quiet resolve returning to her. "May I ask?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Why you look at me like that? Like what? Like I am not enemy." Thomas stepped closer, voice low. "Because you're not." Her breath trembled. She seemed to absorb the statement like warmth. Then faintly she smiled. It was small, uncertain, but real. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Edwards waved Thomas over. "Command wants an inventory report before dusk. I'll watch her." Thomas turned to Miyako. "I'll be back in a bit. Do you need anything?" She shook her head. "You go." He left reluctantly. Outside the camp buzzed with unease. Prisoners sensed something shifting, some blend of fear and hope bitterly intertwined. Officers snapped at anyone who asked questions. Even the birds perched differently on the fence posts, as if the land itself held its breath. Thomas filed the inventory and returned to the infirmary as quickly as regulations allowed. But when he entered, he froze. Miyako was not on the cot. Panic surged through him like ice. He scanned the hut. Nothing. He stepped outside, heart hammering. And there she was, a few yards away, sitting on the ground beneath a barren acacia tree, staring at the sky as if she had never seen it before. Thomas exhaled with relief and approached slowly. "You all right?" he asked. Miyako nodded without turning. "I wanted air, sky." She looked up at the fading orange light. During the war, sky was always danger. Planes, fire, bombs, always something falling from above. She paused. But tonight, sky is just sky. Thomas sat beside her, careful to leave a respectful space. They watched the clouds drift like slow ships across the horizon. After a long silence, Miyako spoke again. "My family, far from here. I do not know if they live." Thomas had expected the grief eventually, but the rawness in her voice still cut him. "Where are they, Hiroshima?" She whispered the word as if it carried its own crater of sorrow. "I have no letters, no word." Thomas's breath faltered. He had heard the news. The bomb, the destruction, the unimaginable horror. He wasn't sure how much Miyako understood yet, or whether anyone had told her. He chose his words with care. "When you're recovered, the Red Cross will help you find information. You're not alone in this." Miyako closed her eyes. "In war, everyone alone." "Not anymore," Thomas said firmly. Her breath broke as though something inside her cracked open grief too long suppressed. Then she whispered, voice trembling, "Thomas, I am afraid to hope." "I know," he said quietly. "Hope hurts." She looked at him, really looked, and he saw in her eyes the weight of everything she had lost: home, certainty, dignity, the pieces of herself scattered across battlefields and camps. Then, "Why do you hope?" she asked. Thomas answered without hesitation. "Because you survived." Her breath caught. A single tear slipped down her cheek, reflecting the last light of dusk like a falling star. And in that moment, beneath the broken tree, beneath the sky learning to be harmless again, something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition. Two wounded lives, two fractured nations, two people standing in the rubble of what war had taken, building something wordless, fragile, and impossibly human. Miyako wiped her eyes but did not look away. "Thank you, Thomas," she whispered. "For what?" "For reminding me. I am still alive." He held her gaze steady and warm. "You are. And I'm glad." A breeze stirred through the camp carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth, and for the first time in years the world felt just barely capable of beginning again. The morning that changed everything began with silence, not the tense stillness of war, but the softer kind, like the earth pausing for breath. A pale mist curled around the camp buildings, blurring the wire fences into ghostly lines. For the first time, the air did not feel like something to survive, but something merely to inhale. Thomas approached the infirmary with 2 tin bowls, simple porridge barely warm. Miyako was sitting upright when he entered, her posture straighter than any day before. Her face was still thin, but the hollowness had begun to lift. She was becoming herself again, piece by fragile piece. "Breakfast," he said lightly. She accepted the bowl with both hands, a gesture of quiet respect. "Thank you." Thomas sat beside her. "How are you feeling today?" "Stronger," she said. "Stronger than I thought possible." He smiled. "Good. Edward says you're healing faster than expected." "I think—" She hesitated, searching for courage. "It is because someone spoke my name kindly." Thomas's chest tightened. "You deserve that." Her eyes softened, but before she could respond, footsteps approached outside. The flap of the infirmary door swung open. Sergeant Colby stood in the frame, adjusting his cap. "Ainsley," he said curtly, "command has issued new orders." Thomas straightened. Sir Colby cleared his throat, glancing briefly at Miyako. "Some of the Japanese prisoners will be transported to a neutral processing station. Red Cross oversight, medical exams, possible repatriation." Miyako stiffened. Thomas swallowed. "When a convoy leaves at noon." Colby shifted uneasily, his gaze flicking between them. "She's on the list." The words landed like a stone dropping into still water, soft, but with ripples that reached everything. Miyako set down her bowl. Her fingers trembled. "I leave today." Thomas forced his voice steady. "It seems so." Colby exhaled impatiently. "Make sure she's ready. Both of you, no trouble." Then he exited with the same brusque stomp he always carried. The door flap fell shut. Silence again. But this time, sharper. Heavy. Miyako stared at her hands. "Leave!" Where Thomas sat beside her, voice calm. A safer place, better food, medical care, and from there, maybe home. Her eyes glistened with fear. Home might not exist. "Then you'll build something new," he said gently. "You don't have to face it alone." She looked at him, then really looked, and he felt the weight of her unspoken question. "Will I be alone once I leave here? Once I leave you?" Thomas tried to keep his expression composed, but something flickered through anyway. Something human, vulnerable, impossible to hide. She whispered, "I do not know how to say goodbye." Thomas swallowed. "Then don't say it yet." They spent the remaining hours in a quiet rhythm, packing a small bundle of belongings Edwards helped gather, folding the infirmary blanket she had slept under, waiting for the sun to climb higher. When it was nearly noon, Thomas walked her toward the front gate. The convoy of trucks waited in a neat line, engines idling. A Red Cross flag fluttered from the lead vehicle. Miyako walked slowly, leaning just slightly on Thomas, not from pain now, but from the weight of uncertainty. Every guard they passed stared, some with disdain, some with curiosity, some with something resembling admiration. Word of her collapse and of the British soldier who carried her had become something like a camp legend. When they reached the transfer checkpoint, she stopped. Her breath trembled in the air. "Thomas," she said quietly. "Yes." She reached into the pocket of her borrowed loose-fitting shirt and pulled out the half-burned wooden tag, the one with her name partially scorched, the only thing she carried from her past life. She held it out. "I want you. Keep this." Thomas froze. "Miyako, that's yours. It's your identity." "No." She shook her head softly. "It is who I was." Before war, before suffering, before dawn. She looked into his eyes. You helped me become someone again, someone not broken. His throat tightened. I don't deserve that. You carried me, she whispered. You saw me as human, when others did not. That is, more than deserve. Thomas accepted the tag with both hands, honoring the gesture. The charred wood was warm from her touch. He looked at her small, wounded, but standing in the sunlight with a strength that humbled him. Miyako, he said, struggling to find words large enough, I don't know where your path goes from here, but I hope it leads you to peace. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her breath. Thomas, she murmured, if peace finds me, it will be because someone lifted me from the ground when world was darkest. He exhaled shakily. For a long, fragile heartbeat, they simply stood together between two worlds, the ending war behind them, an uncertain future ahead. A Red Cross officer called, We're boarding. Miyako flinched at the sudden volume. Thomas steadied her, placing one hand lightly near her shoulder without touching. She bowed not deeply but with a sincerity that pierced him. Thank you, she whispered, for dawn. It was the most beautiful goodbye he had ever heard. He bowed his head in return. Be safe. She stepped toward the truck ladder, paused, looked back one final time. Their eyes met, an unspoken promise passing between them. Survive. Heal. Remember. Then she climbed aboard. The engines rumbled, dust lifted around the tires. The convoy rolled slowly forward, then disappeared beyond the ridge, carrying Miyako toward whatever remained of her world. Thomas stood there long after the trucks vanished. Only when the wind shifted did he realize he was still holding the wooden name tag, Miyako's last piece of the fire given freely into his hands. He closed his fingers around it. The charred edges pricked his skin. The carved lines felt like a heartbeat, and as the sun rose higher, warm, bright, unbroken. Thomas understood. He had not rescued a stranger at dawn. He had been rescued too, from bitterness, from numbness, from the belief that war erased all good. Miyako had shown him, otherwise had shown him, humanity still lived even in the ashes. He lifted the small tag to his chest, holding it like a vow. Somewhere out there she was beginning again, and so was he.